Some sports cars become legends the moment they arrive. Others spend decades waiting for the world to realize what they truly were. The Toyota Supra Mk4 belongs firmly to the second group. Today, it stands among the most celebrated Japanese performance cars ever built, selling for prices that once seemed unimaginable. Enthusiasts praise its legendary reliability, tuners chase impossible horsepower figures, collectors compete for pristine examples, and its reputation continues growing with every passing year. But here's the strange part. When the fourth-generation Supra first appeared in 1993, almost nobody expected any of this to happen. It wasn't an instant commercial success. It didn't dominate global sales charts. In many markets, it quietly disappeared from showrooms while buyers turned their attention toward luxury sedans, practical SUVs, and increasingly refined grand tourers. In fact, there was a very real possibility that the Supra name would simply fade into history. To understand why that almost happened, we have to look beyond the car itself and examine the world into which it was born. During the late 1980s, Japan experienced one of the largest economic bubbles in modern history. Manufacturers invested enormous sums into ambitious engineering projects. Companies competed not only on price but on innovation, creating machines that often prioritized excellence over profitability. Nissan developed the Skyline GTR, Honda introduced the NSX. Mazda perfected the RX-7. Mitsubishi and Subaru transformed rally technology into road cars. It was a golden age unlike anything the automotive industry had ever seen. But by the early 1990s, that dream began collapsing. Japan's financial bubble burst, triggering years of economic uncertainty. Consumer confidence weakened, disposable income shrank, and demand for expensive sports cars declined dramatically. Manufacturers suddenly faced a completely different reality. Instead of asking how to build the fastest coupe, executives began asking whether buyers still wanted one at all. Ironically, this was exactly the moment Toyota decided to create the most ambitious Supra it had ever produced. Development of the A80 wasn't about making the previous generation slightly better. Engineers approached the project almost from scratch. One of their biggest priorities wasn't adding more equipment or luxury, it was removing unnecessary weight. Compared with its predecessor, the new Supra became significantly lighter through extensive engineering optimization. Aluminum components appeared throughout the suspension, hood, and various structural elements. The body became more rigid while shedding kilograms wherever possible. Even the iconic rear wing wasn't designed simply to attract attention. It generated genuine aerodynamic stability at high speed, reflecting Toyota's determination to build a machine capable of competing with the best sports cars in the world. Personally, I think that's what makes the Mk4 Supra so fascinating. Toyota wasn't trying to build the fastest car in every category. It wasn't chasing outrageous top speed records or overwhelming horsepower figures from the factory. Instead, engineers focused on creating a platform with extraordinary balance, durability, and engineering headroom. They wanted a car that owners could trust for years, whether commuting through city traffic or spending entire weekends on racing circuits. At the heart of that philosophy sat an engine that would eventually become one of the most famous power plants in automotive history. The 2JZ GTE wasn't designed to become a tuning legend. It was simply engineered with margins so generous that enthusiasts would later discover capabilities even Toyota never publicly advertised. Featuring a cast-iron block, forged crankshaft, exceptionally strong internals, and sequential twin turbochargers, the 3-liter inline-six officially produced 276 horsepower in Japan under the gentleman's agreement between domestic manufacturers. Just like several other Japanese performance cars of the era, everyone understood the official number didn't tell the entire story. Real output was widely believed to be significantly higher, but Toyota had little interest in participating in a horsepower war. Reliability mattered far more than marketing. The engine delivered smooth, effortless power across the rev range while maintaining the durability that had already become synonymous with Toyota engineering. Behind it sat one of the finest manual transmissions ever installed in a production sports car, the legendary Getrag V160 6-speed. Built to withstand enormous torque reserves, it shifted with remarkable precision while possessing strength that would later prove invaluable to tuners around the world. Long before the aftermarket embraced the Supra, Toyota had already built a drivetrain capable of handling far more performance than almost anyone expected. Yet despite all of this brilliant engineering, the automotive world barely noticed. Sales remained modest. Production numbers stayed relatively low. Outside Japan and a handful of enthusiast circles, the Supra was simply another expensive sports coupe entering a market that was rapidly losing interest in expensive sports coupes. At that moment, nobody, not even Toyota itself, could have imagined that the A80 wasn't approaching the end of its story. In reality, its legend hadn't even begun. When the Supra reached customers, it quickly earned a reputation for being exceptionally refined, remarkably reliable, and surprisingly comfortable for everyday driving. But those qualities weren't what would eventually make it famous. In fact, during the 1990s, many automotive journalists actually criticized the Supra for not being as raw or as emotionally aggressive as some of its rivals. Compared with lightweight machines like the Mazda RX-7 or Honda NSX, the Toyota felt more mature, more composed, and more focused on high-speed stability than razor-sharp responses. Personally, I think Toyota understood something many people overlooked. They weren't building a weekend toy. They were building a platform capable of surviving hundreds of thousands of kilometers while still delivering genuine performance whenever the driver demanded it. That philosophy would become the foundation of everything the Supra would later represent. Then something unexpected happened. As owners began experimenting with the 2JZ GTE, they realized the engine seemed almost impossible to intimidate. Mild modifications produced dramatic gains with very little sacrifice in reliability. Larger exhaust systems, improved intercoolers, increased boost pressure, and revised engine management quickly pushed power far beyond factory figures. 400 horsepower became almost routine. 500 soon followed. Unlike many performance engines of the era, the 2JZ rarely complained. The cast-iron block, forged crankshaft, and massively over-engineered bottom end simply absorbed the extra stress as if Toyota had secretly anticipated it all along. Before long, workshops around Japan started asking an entirely different question. If the engine remained reliable at 500 horsepower, where exactly was the limit? That curiosity transformed the Supra into one of the most important tuning platforms in automotive history. Legendary companies such as HKS, Top Secret, Veilside, Blitz, Trust, G-Ready, and JUN invested enormous resources into developing increasingly ambitious upgrade packages. Larger turbochargers replaced the factory sequential system. Fuel systems became more sophisticated. Cylinder heads were optimized. Engine management grew increasingly advanced. Every year seemed to bring another Supra producing more power than anyone thought possible. 600 horsepower no longer shocked enthusiasts. 800 became achievable. Then 1000. Eventually, fully built Supras began producing well over 2,000 horsepower, setting records in drag racing and standing mile competitions around the world. Yet perhaps the most astonishing part wasn't the number itself. It was the fact that the same basic engine architecture remained at the heart of those incredible builds. Very few production engines have ever demonstrated such extraordinary engineering reserves. That's why the 2JZ earned a reputation that extended far beyond Toyota enthusiasts. Mechanics, racing teams, and engineers from completely different automotive communities all began acknowledging the same truth. Toyota hadn't simply built a strong engine. It had accidentally created one of the greatest internal combustion platforms ever designed. But horsepower alone doesn't explain why the Supra refused to disappear. Countless powerful cars have faded into obscurity over the years. The Supra survived because it became deeply embedded in automotive culture itself. Gran Turismo introduced millions of players to the car long before they ever saw one in person. For an entire generation, the Supra became one of the first virtual performance cars they modified, tuned, and raced. They learned how changing gear ratios affected acceleration. They experimented with suspension settings. They upgraded turbochargers and chased impossible lap times. The game didn't simply entertain players. It quietly taught them why the Supra was special. Around the same time, the global tuning scene exploded. International magazines filled their covers with increasingly outrageous Supra builds, proving that Japanese engineering could compete directly with Europe's finest supercars at a fraction of the cost. The orange Top Secret Supra chasing over 300 km per hour on public highways, the radical Veilside widebody conversions, and countless record-breaking drag cars all contributed to the same growing mythology. Each project reinforced the idea that the Supra wasn't limited by its factory specifications. It was limited only by the imagination and budget of its owner. Ironically, while the Supra's legend grew larger every year, Toyota itself quietly ended production. By 2002, tightening emissions regulations, declining sports car sales, and changing market priorities brought the A80 story to an end. At the time, very few people realized they were witnessing the conclusion of one of the greatest engineering chapters in Toyota's history. What looked like the end of the Supra would ultimately become the beginning of its immortality. The Toyota Supra Mk4 never became a legend because it was the fastest sports car of the 1990s. It wasn't. It never held the world's top speed record, it wasn't the lightest coupe on the market, and it certainly wasn't the most exclusive. Yet somehow, more than 30 years after its debut, the A80 Supra has become one of the most respected performance cars ever built. Personally, I think that's because the Supra achieved something extremely rare. It didn't force people to admire it overnight. It earned that admiration over decades. Every year, every race, every record-breaking build, and every perfectly preserved example added another chapter to a story that simply refused to end. Toyota originally set out to build an exceptionally reliable Grand Touring sports car. Instead, it accidentally created the perfect foundation for generations of enthusiasts, racers, engineers, and dreamers. The legendary 2JZ GTE proved that durability and extraordinary performance could exist in the same engine. The Getrag V160 became one of the strongest manual transmissions ever fitted to a production sports car. The chassis demonstrated that stability, balance, and intelligent engineering could be just as important as outright horsepower. Together, they created a machine that seemed almost impossible to outgrow. Whether an owner wanted a comfortable weekend cruiser, a track weapon, a drift car, a drag racing monster, or a 1,000-horsepower street machine, the Supra adapted without losing its identity. Very few automobiles have ever offered that kind of versatility. Ironically, the slow sales that once threatened the Supra's future became one of the reasons collectors value it so highly today. Production numbers remained relatively low, many cars were heavily modified or destroyed, and original low-mileage examples became increasingly difficult to find. As demand continued growing around the world, prices climbed to levels that would have seemed unimaginable when these cars sat unsold in dealerships during the late 1990s. Time completely rewrote the Supra story. What was once considered an expensive sports coupe in a declining market became one of the most desirable Japanese performance cars ever produced. But perhaps the Supra's greatest achievement has nothing to do with auction prices or horsepower records. It inspired an entire generation to fall in love with Japanese engineering. Long before many enthusiasts could afford their dream car, they were reading about Supras in magazines, building them in racing games, watching them dominate tuning competitions, and learning how engines, turbochargers, and suspension systems actually worked. For countless people around the world, the Supra wasn't simply a favorite car. It became the gateway into automotive culture itself. Even today, manufacturers continue building faster, more advanced performance cars filled with sophisticated electronics and incredible technology. Yet enthusiasts still compare them to a sports coupe designed more than 3 decades ago. That's perhaps the greatest compliment any automobile can receive. A true benchmark never disappears, it simply becomes timeless. The Toyota Supra Mk4 wasn't created to become a global icon. It became one because its engineering was honest, its potential seemed limitless, and its legacy was built by the people who refused to let it be forgotten. Some sports cars enjoy a brief moment of fame before history moves on. The Supra chose a different path. It simply refused to die. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more stories about the world's most legendary automobiles. Every subscription helps the channel continue bringing these incredible automotive stories back to life. And now I'd love to hear your opinion. Do you think the Toyota Supra Mk4 truly deserves its reputation as the greatest tuning platform ever built, or would another Japanese icon take that title? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next documentary.